Let me go into restream. Greetings and salutations. We are here getting ready for our session at 10:30, when we will be speaking with Lorena. Good morning. Are you hearing me?
Yes, how are you?
Good morning.
Awesome. Good morning. We're a little bit early, but it's great. We're live streaming already because I'm new to using this system. And I said, you know what? It's a conversation, it's not a formal webinar.
Okay.
And I really want to have the opportunity to have a conversation. So while we're networking, Lorena Dexter Chaichan,
Yes.
please meet David Appelan. He's coming on at 11 o'clock. He's one of our speakers. And I'm so delighted that he can join us. We'll be talking later about what he's doing in the school system. But I do hope you have a copy of your thing ready, a copy of your story ready, because I was so fascinated by that. So folks, if you join us, it's now 10:30 in the morning on the eastern seaboard of the United States of America. I'm actually in Jamaica and we happen to be on the same time. So I'm also 10:30 a.m. where I am. And I just want to welcome to our conversation on this UN International Day of Education with Lorena Dexter Chaichan, who is, and she'll tell me if I mispronounce her name, who is one of those people who are part of the One Day in 2050 community. And before I asked her to read from her story, which has to do with education, which is why I invited her, her story was posted on January 18th. So I want you to go to oneday2050.org and have a chance to look at it. But I'll be asking her to read a bit from her story, because what we do at Futuresense now is really try to make sense of how the future is emerging. And this conversation today on the UN International Day of Education is about advancing sustainability literacy. Now, sustainability has many facets, and her story for me focuses more on the human side of the sustainability question. Sustainability for whom? What does that look like? And so we're going to have a conversation with her. And as I said, oneday2050.org is a website. We were asked 365 of us to contribute a story from a day. I think my day is all the way down in July. And I think I wrote about space or sustainability or something. I don't remember. I have to go and look at what I wrote. But Lorena Dexter's story was about education. And I'll have her read the headline and the first paragraph, and then we'll take it from there. So Lorena, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Really appreciate this opportunity and nice to meet you. And thanks for joining me today. The one context I'll give quickly is this was supposed to be written in the form of a news release. So that's the style in which you'll have to think about when I read it. So the Institute for High Potential is currently accepting applications for new students. Parents are invited to submit their child's IQ and EQ score along with current genomic. Institute for High Potential, West Vancouver, Canada. Parents are invited to submit their child's IQ and EQ score along with current genomic sequencing to the Institute for High Potential by January 31st. Up to 20 children will be admitted to our kindergarten program for our exclusive boarding school facilities housed in a climate-controlled dome in Cypress Park. The school is fortified with a fire. Sorry?
Yes. So her story talks about the Institute for High Potential. It's a kindergarten school. It's set in 2050. It's in a climate-controlled dome. And the first thing I wanted to ask about, in that world, it's a climate control dome in 2050. What is the backstory to what we're to understand when you say climate control dome? Because you're writing your story as if you are in Canada, right?
Yes.
At that point. So Canada 2050. What is it that you're making a statement about when you say a climate control dome?
Yeah, good question. I think here on the west coast of Canada and probably in a lot of the west coast of the United States as well, we've had some pretty severe climate impacts already. We've had a heat dome 2 years ago where temperatures were almost 50 degrees Celsius, which is just outrageous and unreal in Canada previously. And now, of course, we're seeing things like...
Hello?
Hi.
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Um, Basically, we've seen some pretty severe climate impacts already with regards to forest fires, heat domes, atmospheric rivers, severe flooding, mudslides, avalanches. All these things are happening already. And so I guess the backstory to this would be nothing has been essentially done to really mitigate this or change course or build more sustainable economies. And therefore, that's what the future would look like, in which privileged children would be attending climate-controlled schools.
Okay, so climate meaning the internal climate is said to be a particular time, not necessarily meaning climate that you're assuming then that Canada at that time is warmer. It's so dome meaning that it's not. When I think of a dome, I think like of a terrestrial system. So is it a dome all over the city or just over the school?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I hadn't considered that, but I'm guessing in this context, it would probably be over the school, because I think I'm also making a commentary on the disparity between those who are privileged and those who are not. And so this is a fortified environment that's safe, whereas perhaps those who are not as privileged would not have the same fortification around them. So, for example, if there's a forest fire close by or a mudslide or a flood, they're going to be not protected.
Okay, so let's go on and read the second paragraph where we talk about the conditions of the children in the school.
Okay. So the school is proudly equipped with a team of medical doctors who can administer annual vaccines for current and emerging pandemics. All classrooms feature purified air circulation. Our curriculum is designed to optimize each student's potential. Upon entry, your child will undergo rigorous personality and skills testing to identify their future career path. This testing will inform how our expert technicians build and customize your child's personal learning bot. The learning bot will ensure your child receives information and knowledge required to make a vital contribution to remaining society. Bots are made to resemble human teachers, and ours are celebrated for their friendly demeanor, impressive intelligence, and lifelike attributes. Many children.
All right. So this is where I kind of really got blown away. So 30 years from now, we're talking about human-like bots. In this world, are you saying then that the learning technician, is the learning technician a real human and the teacher a bot? I mean, explain that a little bit further for me, please.
Yeah, another great question. I think I imagined some humans would program the bot, and the humans would probably be highly skilled and trained to program these bots to optimize all knowledge for the student. And the idea that I had, which was actually built upon a story I wrote in my youth, was that no potential can be wasted, especially for the privileged. And in order to not waste potential, you can't risk being educated by a human who has flaws. So these robots are designed to not have flaws, if you will. And so therefore, the chance of bringing up a child who doesn't reach their potential is mitigated because it's a bot, it's not a human.
But here's where I really became quite confused. And one of the reasons why I want this One Day in 2050 conversations, this series to happen. I'm really going to try and find somebody every week whose story fascinates me to have a conversation, because in the world in which you're imagining this, I'm thinking about the issue of sustainability, the issue of climate change, which is driving the One Day in 2050. And let me say that my book, Smart Futures for a Flourishing World, I talk about the need to have stories from the future that kind of talk about in an optimistic way what we're trying to get to. I couldn't decide if your story was optimistic or pessimistic, because I don't understand, for me, when I hear about a bot and at the same time you have to test the child's EQ, I'm like, whatever for? The child is not really interacting with another human. What do they need to have any emotional thing for? So I want to ask you, what are you seeing in this world that exists at that time?
Well, to clarify, I don't think it's an optimistic story, sadly. I'm optimistic that we're going to change the future and build a more sustainable world. I don't see the story as optimistic. I think why I put EQ in there.
Wait. So you're saying for you, this story would not be your preferred future?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay, so this is a future you are anxious to get away from. And this is the issue of using a future story. Future storytelling for the audience that might be watching this now or in the future. Future storytelling focuses on either an aspirational future, which is a future we prefer, and then we can talk about the future we fear, and it has to be fairly plausible. Everything that she said here is actually fairly plausible. So it's not like this would never happen. Mm-hmm. And hence why I really wanted to tease out if we had a situation where, because we're really talking about putting personalized learning in classrooms, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. Should personalized learnings, one of the questions we have to think about as humans trying to plot sustainability literacy for the future. Sustainability for me has to include how do we live? What is our well-being? Our well-being emotionally, socially, physically. And I have a feeling that we have tended to look at the environment as only a physical thing, as if the environment does not contribute to our emotional and mental well-being. And so one of the questions we have to think about when we think about the future of education, I'm not myself an educator per se, but I would say as futurists, we all have some kind of say in the education system as parents, as godparents, as grandparents, we always have a say. So in your role as a corporate person, and I believe you are in the school system, but you're on the administrative side, right?
Correct. Yes, I'm in the university system.
Right. So when the conversations are happening now about, teaching sustainability, schools sign up to be part of the SDG, and have you shared the story with your peers? Have you been able to have a conversation, a workshop around the story?
That's a great idea. I should do that. And I think you've inspired me to take that forward. Because this is definitely, I see like writing down my fears as a way of hopefully not having them come true.
Right. So let's go back to the actual story. So we talked about the bots, and these bots are unfailingly pleasant. And I'm thinking, are there any humans that match? And you said something about not wanting their children to be flawed.
Yes.
And so the question is this something you see happening now where parents of the young ones, the kindergartens, are concerned about their children having appearance of always being well-behaved and always having, let's say, a higher aspiration, not just wanting to be, let's say, a policeman or a tin soldier, but they must always want to have these things. What are you seeing emerging around you while you felt that this was a plausible future?
Right. Well, like I said, the seeds of the story came from more than 20 years ago. So I think what's eerie is that it does feel resonant today. But what I'm seeing, I actually have a child who's in grade 2, so she's quite young. I see there's a divide. There's a lot of parents who are so technologically plugged in and enabling their children to be plugged in all the time. And I see how that impacts their behavior. But then I'm also seeing this other side of parents who are going, wait a second, we don't have to succumb and give in to this technologically plugged in lifestyle, if you will, all the time. And I think there's a tension there that's emerging, and it's even emerging as a parenting method, right? So I think there's some interesting divergence scenarios happening around tech, because to me, this is a story that also, there's two things. It's an environmental commentary on what happens if we don't become a more sustainable world. And it's also a social commentary on what happens if we continue to have tech be this unfettered, totalizing presence in our lives. So I'm definitely seeing two different pathways there.
And this is for me a really crucial conversation, because it's the heart of what I'm trying to do as a futurist working in a global space, and myself as an engineer and scientist, to try to remind us that technology should not become the end. It's a means to a better end, but it should not be the end. And so when I see this unfettered glee at the newest shiny toy, it makes me nervous. And so one of the phrases I've been using is the phrase zoetic futures. And zoetic means of life. And so, like yourself, this is probably a word you might want to put in your vocabulary. So say what you're really asking for. Let us look at not just a techno-human future, but we want a human-centered future where, so it's a zoetic future where our life, the life of the plants, the trees, all life, even the rocks have life, they have living energy, right? And so the fact that we're now at the cusp of a breakthrough, when I saw a recent headline that says they have now become able to sort of whip up life from just the chemicals of life. And I'm like, so it's as if we are almost on programming ourselves to approach what I call, the book was a very good book, Homo Deus, right? Man as God, without the emotional or the mental wisdom to really look at it was what we're trying to create. And your story, which talks about a kindergarten school, we have to now be designing kindergarten schools with the future in mind. So as you think about the kindergarten schools of today, how do you feel then about introducing personalized lessons that would allow the child to, quote unquote, learn at their own pace, but at the same time, not replace the human part of it? What would you want to see as a parent yourself of a young child?
That's an interesting question, because I think there's so much about money and funding and what we prioritize for our children in this. And in my case, we're talking about public education, which I really believe in. At the same time, I can see, it almost feels like the priority of our children in public education is it's just not there. I think we need to really change how we value what we're teaching our kids and how we do that. And I think there has to be a model that really understands how important those early years are for their future. And now more than ever, I think we need to remember this generation of children is inheriting a whole set of wicked problems that we've probably never witnessed before and may not even know how to teach them to prepare for. So I think there's got to be a reckoning within all of us, but reflected through the school system, to not also forget that there's wicked problems that might be coming their way, but also the human-centered thing. It's like, yes, you can learn math and you can learn how to use a computer and all those things, but what I'm really seeing the lack of is that human-centered socialization of how to be compassionate, and I'm seeing threads of it, don't get me wrong, they're there, but like focusing on that is a priority, because if we don't have that human-centered model where we're understanding how to be in community, how to not just be an individual, but how to be in community, I think we're going to be at a great loss.
To understand that we are an interdependent species.
Mm-hmm.
We're not back in the days when we were isolated villages and we had to grow our own food and make our own honey and, can our own beans, and then occasionally meet at a festival somewhere once a year to trade beads. You know? And I think as listening to you, and we just came out of a conference here in Jamaica, Global Education Teachers Summit, which happened on Saturday. I was in a session that dealt with principals. How do principals prepare to lead schools of the future? And we had elementary school principal and we had high school principals in my session. And I have to say, I wish we'd had a kindergarten as well, because elementary school, well, it starts at 6, and so they're a little bit more already formed to some extent by the time they get to you, because what they do from 3 to 5 really is what's setting the pace for what they're going to be working with, especially now when the child is restless at home, you give them a game board to play with, and they're learning all the time on their own anyway. So what are they learning, and how are we designing the avatars and the the e-personalities that they interact with, or the fantasy animals or from Disney World or wherever, to teach them how to be fully human. So I'm not sure if any of our people who are listening, Andrew or David, if you have any questions that you might want to ask, since you're on, and David will be speaking later about his work he's doing in teaching, promoting sustainability literacy in Nigeria. Andrew, I happen to know him as well. He also works in supporting disability training and education. So the question is, how then, we're talking about early childhood education of the future. And this is a world that you do not want to see happen. You do not want to see a world in which, you don't want to see a world in which there are bots and there's a climate control system. What power do you as a parent then, as a parent in the system, what power do you have to, let's say, work within the confines of your role to promote this at the school that your child currently attends?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I feel like there's small acts of resistance or small acts of leadership that we can show, and you hope they have a ripple effect. So one of the things that I do is, a lot of teachers nowadays will have these Instagram accounts, and they'll say, oh, if you want to see your child and what they're doing in school, you can log on to Instagram. Well, first of all, I'm not on Instagram. In fact, LinkedIn is the only social platform I use for lots of reasons, which is another conversation. But I resist just accepting all of this as the way it has to be. And I'll say, well, no, actually, I'm not on that platform, and I don't want my child on that platform. And I'll tell other parents, I try not to do it in a way that's preaching. I just share why that matters to me. And why it matters to me is a whole host of reasons around privacy, around not being in this performative state all the time, just being in a state of natural being. So that's one thing I do is I resist that as something that everyone has to do.
Wow.
I think,
actually, I'm shocked.
Yeah.
I would have assumed that they might have maybe a Google in the classroom or something, that you can have a parent day and you can stay in your office and Zoom in once a week or once a month. You Zoom in and have parent hour or something. But to be on Instagram,
Yeah.
I find it a bit troublesome myself.
It's troublesome.
System.
Yeah.
But I always have a problem with, the internet is not necessarily a safe place.
It's not. No, and that's the other thing I'm
to
doing.
have children to be,
Exactly.
Already on, and Instagram is not even designed for school age children.
It's absolutely not. No. And so that's a whole other conversation and we can have. But I guess one of the things I do is I just resist some of these things that we are told are just normal now, right? Like even just the fact that we're supposed to be posting about our lives all the time. I don't want to participate in that for a whole host of reasons regarding my mental environment and my mental health. And I think a lot of us know this, but it's tough. It's tough to resist because it's become this sort of standard. But I think we have to really not look at the standard today, but ask ourselves, what does this mean for tomorrow? And that's where my impetus comes from. It's not so much about today. I go, hey, the more we become performative and we're spending all of this time in this alternate reality, we're not dealing with the reality that we have right in front of us. And so that's something that I do.
Yeah, so and for you then, we think about this to wrap up. We're talking about sustainability literacy as one of the things we want to promote. Your story is a story about a future you fear, and you want to be actively engaged and work around that. How do you think then going forward, based on what we've just said, for example, that you'll be able to use the story to really open conversations where you are at your school, where your child is, at the school where you work? Is this something you could convince other futurists to join you? Is this something that one day in 2050 movement should say, hey, because I have said to them, I'm happy to support anybody who wants to really take their story and make it meaningful, because it's no point in writing a story if nobody reads it and nobody has a conversation about it, right? And so I think I still will be interested in working with you after this is over at your university or at your children's school to have a conversation about your story and say, what does it mean? And what does it mean for the policy of Canada as they begin to think about early childhood education for now and the future? And the decisions that they will make now will help to decide the trajectory. So what's next for you with this story?
Well, thank you for your interest in it, because I hadn't really considered what was next, especially because, like I said, it was built on a story I wrote as a teenager. And it makes me think that there's clearly something in me that's sticking with this, and it's been with me for like more than 20 years. So I think I need to, thanks to your inspiration, engage a bit further in this. I'd love to engage with you and others who care about these things. But I think I should add, in my original story, which had the learning bot raise the child essentially till they were 16, what happened was that child didn't know how to handle human emotions and then ended up destroying the robot in a fit of rage. And the last line is that he was not a stable, the robot was not stable, nor was the human. And I think that spoke to singularity at a time when I didn't even know that word existed. So I think I need to engage further and really explore how do we want tech to rule our lives, and emphasize human-centered technology, and then also realize that if we can use tech to maybe build more sustainable systems, that would probably be a better application than some of the current uses.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lorena Dexter. I hope I've been pronouncing your name correctly. Chai-Chen?
Yes, that's right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. Again, her story is at oneday2050.org. Her story is on January the 18th, and is a story for every day of the year 2050 there. So thank you so much for being a part of the community of One Day 2050. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, folks, we want to thank you for joining with us. If you are watching us on Facebook Live, stay tuned. We're going to just continue with our conversation. We're going to be joined right now by David Afolayan. We're hoping to be joined by Charlotte King, Raina Turner Greenleaf, and Renee Rattray. Dr. Renee Rattray has had to bail out as she's not well. Dr. Rattray has had to bail out. So from the Caribbean, representing the Caribbean region, I've asked Dr. Nsambe Jaja to join us. So David, you can feel free to turn on your screen, get to know your fellow panelists who is on the call. And as they drift in, just want to say how happy I was to be able to have that conversation with Lorena. I mean, when I read her story, it was like, wow, I can't believe she wrote this story on January 18th, which is 6 days before UN Day of Education. Actually, the gentleman that wrote the day of the 19th also had a story on education. I also invited him to come, but he couldn't make it. And his story was more about just that we had succeeded in putting sustainability on the radar, and so people were being taught in a particular way. So that's it in terms of One Day 2050. And I wanted to say thank you again for joining us, and welcome to Dr. Nsambe Jaja, Raina Turner Greenlee, David Afolayan. If you could turn on your cameras and make sure we can be seen, and hopefully Ms. Charlotte King will be joining us. We have listening in with one ear, Mr. Fred Mednick. I'm so excited, or Dr. Fred Mednick. I'm so excited to have him. He'll be closing us out at noon. And we just met, and he's one of the authors in the series Resetting Our Future. And our group is very unusual. Normally, authors are lonely wolves that do stuff by themselves. I'm so excited that our publisher sees fit to bring us all together from time to time. And I'm meeting some of the most amazing people. Dr. Fred Mednick is the founder of Teachers Without Borders, and I can't wait to hear from him. So David, can you get your camera on so I can make sure you're there and I can hear you say something?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to be on this roundtable with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
Jaja, if you could say something.
Good morning, everyone. I am very delighted to be a part of this conversation this morning. I expect to learn a lot so that I can share with others, and I hope I have something useful to share with everybody.
Raina Turner Greenlee, somebody I met also in the heat of COVID. It's so fascinating to me that I've met so many wonderful people around the world in the heart of COVID. So COVID, as terrible as it was, did us some good services, I think, in allowing us to really make some great friendships across the borders. So Ryan, as soon as you're able, if you could get your camera on so we can get started. We have a couple of minutes to chit chat. And I really like to do that to relax the people because it's not a webinar. It's not meant to be, even though it's International Day of Education, it's really meant to be a conversation because I believe that conversations are what will eventually create the space to change the world. Mm-hmm. I wanted to say that I met David in the middle of COVID, or just before COVID. No, in the middle of COVID, the first year of COVID, 2020, we were designing a project to build a sustainable agri-tech system, which include weather stations for poor farmers in southwest Nigeria, I believe. And so a bunch of us were working furiously on it for about maybe 6 weeks. We would meet every week, and Nigerians and myself and some others from the from different schools. And we just stayed in touch. We didn't get the funding, but we stayed in touch. We didn't get the funding yet. There is still hope. I don't want to think that we can never get the funding because we've made some really great relationships. So allow me then to welcome you again and thank you for coming in. Zil Tabakman, man, I hope I'm pronouncing it. Thank you for being a guest. Those of you who are watching on LinkedIn Live or on Facebook Live, thank you so much for tuning in. Please share the link with a friend and let us get started. So I'd like to welcome David. Yes?
You said where you met David. You didn't say where you met me.
Okay, I should say where I met you. And so as we get started, let me introduce our other speakers, Dr. Jaja, and first of all, and I'll wait until Raina joins us to introduce her. So Dr. Nsabet Jaja, I met a few years ago. I don't know if I should say how many, but maybe I can be proud to say how many. Yes. It's probably close to 45 years ago, when I was a somewhat recalcitrant teenager in her chemistry class. And so I would have to say, to some extent, she's partially responsible why I became an engineer. She certainly did not discourage me, because in high school, I did want to be an engineer, and I did become an engineer. And over the years, we have remained friends, confidants, mentor, mentee, sisters, mother, daughter, you name it, we have been it. And one of the reasons why I had her fill in for Dr. Ratri is because Dr. Jaja has been very instrumental in many ways in Jamaica. One, she's involved in the Jamaica Customer Service Association. She's a chairperson. She's also the chairperson of the Caribbean Institute of Management Consultants, who do a lot of work around the SDGs in the Caribbean region. And this conversation is meant not just to focus on K through 12, but it's meant to focus on how we have sustainability literacy embedded in the work we're doing, whether we're doing a training like what David is doing in his after-school programming, as well as in his business as a GIS expert, right? Or whether or not we're working with clients like the Ministry of Agriculture, universities in the region, who are talking about strategic planning and the visions of their schools. I would think that everybody has to be a part of this conversation. And we're joined by Raina, another person who I met in the heart of COVID. I think I met her in 2021. Right?
Yes.
And her work is, and she'll probably tell you more about it, is in trying to get Black sustainability community together to get to know each other, to not always feel like they're the only person in the room, and to talk about what it means to be sustainable from the point of view of the US system, right? The US system in climate justice and environmental justice. So we're going to get started. And I guess my first question is, and I don't want to have a set of pre-planned questions, but I always like to remind us that our conversation is based on the future. We're Futuresense now. Our conversation is not about the past, things we cannot change. It's about what we want for the future, what we can create together, and the things we're working on today that are helping to transform the future. So we know that SDG 4, quality education, focuses on largely K through 12. But sustainability has to be carried through all aspects of the education system. And so I wanted to ask each of you from your perspective to talk about how your work as a consultant, as a professional in all the fields that you're professionals in, because you work across, many of you, all of you here work across different fields. How do you, as people I know to be very focused on sustainability, begin to talk to people in your fields who are not interested? Where do you start? So it's a broad question because I want to start broad. When you think about the future you want, how are you beginning to see yourself as a change agent then and an educator in the sustainability space, even though that's not your title? It's not your title, but again, education can no longer be textbook. So who would like to jump in and take it away?
May I?
Yes, you may.
So that the other speakers who bring on their profound response to this question, I would have gotten mine in before. So from the position that I sit in both the Jamaica Customer Service Association as its chairman and the president of the Caribbean Institute of Management Consultants, which is a part of a global institute that has member institutes all across the world, I see the critical need right now for a mindset shift. You know, Therese Turner-Jones talks about a tectonic shift in the mindset of our people to be able to look more futuristically than at the current situation, or to look at what has happened in the past and assume that it is a linear extension, that the future is going to be a linear extension. So I am so grateful, Dr. Nelson, for the work that you are doing in the future space and the way you have made it relevant to all sectors. Yes, and the fact that you have been educating people and expanding their minds in such a way that they can actually see the future through a futuristic lens. Dr. Nelson was one of our speakers at International Consultants Day 2022, when we celebrated that regionally in the Caribbean, but it's a global celebration. And we asked her to speak on the future of consulting because I wanted my consulting colleagues to look beyond the boundaries of what they were currently seeing, to be able to see a future that is going to require a different kind of mindset, different sets of attitudes, different sets of relationships with their clients, so that their clients too can look beyond the bottom line of today to what is going to sustain the organization in terms of the competencies, the skills, the knowledge, and the tools of their people to be able to make these organizations, government, non-governmental, private sector organizations, sustainable into the future. And knowledge is the key. Application of knowledge is the key. But first of all, you need to have a mindset to be able to receive that knowledge. And that's where I'll start.
Thank you. Raina, you want to take it from there?
Sure, that's something to follow up. You sure set the stage. Give thanks. I would like to echo a lot of what Mama Nsombi has shared. Gratitude for that. And I think as the question was posed, how do we approach it? I think we're dealing a lot with intergenerational education. And so we are educating from the youth to those that are a little bit older, young adults, all the way to seniors, those that are enthusiastic about learning, those that are already experts within their fields around the globe, anybody of African descent. And I think the big piece that we deal with is making sure that we are being very relevant. As we do look toward the past for a lot of our information to ground and to set the stage, a lot of people look at sustainability, they look at planning for the future, climate resiliency as something that's not within our community. And so to really bring it together, to pair what has been done already, what we have done in the past, prior to enslavement, prior to colonialism, and ground that from a culturally relevant perspective, and then take them forward with how does this really relate to your daily lives? We try not to use a lot of jargon, technical jargon, or anything like that, and just making those parallels while still introducing the jargon later on so that they're clear about it. So we've done green workforce development trainings. We've definitely worked with people to help develop a lexicon so people can have some healthier translations of what some of these terms mean. But we can't go out and just let's talk about resiliency hubs and let's talk about, sustainability. And people are looking like, what does that have to do with me and my daily life? And what's that going to fix? I don't have time for that. I'm trying to feed my children. I'm trying to deal with all these other issues that we already know our marginalized communities deal with day in and day out. So how do we make it relevant? We look at what the challenges are on the ground and we tie them into sustainability principles. We tie them into the challenges that we see and say, look, this is what we're actually trying to do. And if you pursue a career in this path, you can have greater economic mobility. If you're looking toward the future and this is what you like to see for your children and your children's children, here are some pathways to get there. Here are some careers. Here are some strategies for you to actually change your lifestyle, change some of your habits. So we try to make it relevant, and we do our absolute best to tie in a culturally relevant approach to any education that we deal with. I hope that without me going over, because I'm looking forward to hearing the other presenter,
Yes.
but that's
I'd
what
love
we
for
do.
David. Yeah, I'm going to ask David to jump in and talk to us
Yeah.
about what's happening in Nigeria.
Dr. Claire, thank you once again for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. And just as you did in the introduction, COVID-19 has been so eventful and impactful around the world. One of the good things for it is that brought together a number of people that might never have had time in their regular schedule to connect with people. But because of COVID-19, we all had to get connected online and get used to the new norm. And for education, it's been a transformation that would have taken years if it was to go the normal route. That's talking about moving people to start to teach online, to start to consider mixed learning and blended hybrid and all of that. But due to the challenges of COVID-19 and also the challenges that came, economic challenges that came right after it, everyone has been forced to develop rapidly, to adapt materials quickly, to learn new technologies. I mean, it's been massive. And I think that's one of the positives that we should look at in the COVID-19 experience that we all had. And it also got us to see that technology indeed is the way to go to mainstream education. Looking at it from the perspective from Nigeria, where I am, it's been very interesting because the education community were forced to develop curriculum that could cater for students in their homes. It's like coming from one extreme to the other. I mean, and it got to a point that schools were forced to have online classes, which they never would have done most schools just had maybe computer classes and all of that. From primary schools and all of that, they just have maybe one computer teacher, but now everyone had to be online. I mean, it's interesting, it's really, really dynamic. And I've seen the opportunities that are in this that we are latching on for sustainability. From my perspective, I believe I'll still talk more about our experience in Nigeria. We've been trying to promote what we call geoliteracy. Geoliteracy is a new term around, but it's more been propounded by the National Geographic, which they've seen it as the ability to use geographic understanding, reasoning, and technology to make decisions and solve problems. In fact, the National Geographic was saying geoliteracy can reduce the cost of bad decisions making and provide foundation for positive breakthroughs. For us, I have a foundation, a background in the geographic information systems. I consult, and I saw a need to promote geoliteracy, particularly in our education community, in secondary schools and in universities. And as I said, the COVID-19 gave me the tools I needed because everybody was online. They were familiar with the tools that we would normally have had to put before them as new tools. And it has opened up new doors for us to be able to promote awareness of the systems, what is going on around, and put tools in the hands of students so that they are better able to make decisions and be equipped to solve problems. That's been our experience. And it's been a mixed match for us because we are also faced with economic problems in our country. We are faced with political instability. We are faced with security challenges. But despite all that is going on around, we're able to, with the window of technology, be able to bring a lot of young people to be able to better appreciate their world, take decisions that add value to them, and they're able to take decisions, particularly about their future careers. It gives us a tool that we can look into the future with them, and they see how they fit into it. I mean, it's been an interesting one for me and for all that we're doing in Nigeria. And thank you again for this opportunity to connect with others around the world.
Wow.
I wanted to start with thinking about this in terms of not the schools that you're working with, because to some extent, I'm not so concerned about, I am concerned, but I don't have as much concerns about sustainability, literacy within the school system, because, and furthermore, we have, later on, we'll be hearing from the person who runs Teachers Without Borders. I'm so excited about what he's thinking. But I'm concerned about those who already have left school, who are now in decision-making spaces. And you as a GI expert, I know by now you'll be well respected across Nigeria, at least a certain space in Nigeria, for all the work you've been doing over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. So in terms of your clients though, and the stakeholders that are not necessarily your clients, but who are around the system, how are you getting them to hear somebody like yourself who is passionate about the conversation on sustainability, water issues, and flooding issues, all the things that are happening in Nigeria, which I know you are passionate about? How are you engaging them?
Yes, thank you.
And if
very
not
much.
you, who is engaging them? If you are not doing it, who is engaging them?
Yeah, I thank you for this perspective that you want to find out. For us as a consultant, one of the things that we did was to align our vision with the job that we take up. He has to go through the sustainability test. This in looking at what exactly our clients doing, how will our impacts bring about sustainability? How can we connect them so that we don't just embark on projects, but we unveil the circle in which we work. For example, there's an ongoing project in my state. It's called the Ibadan Flood Management Project. It's a World Bank funded intervention, which came up after the flood of 2011 in Ibadan. the flood was very devastating, and there was a need for a turnaround look at the approach of government and the city with regards to resilience, and looking at, because that flood is like a cyclical flood, but this came and the devastation was much. So that project was launched, and it's been an intervention to put in place like a stopgap for what's been destroyed, to put up infrastructure to accommodate for climate change. Therefore, channels have been widened. All these infrastructure, the bridges and all of them, they've been widened, they've been strengthened, new roads have been built. And that's a project that we were involved in. Now, a critical component of what we're doing is to host that knowledge that has been acquired online, and to create an academic exchange such that with that project, because there's been a lot of survey that was done, there has been a lot of analysis of the flood flow, the record of floods over the past 100 years. There's been a lot of analysis that has been done. There's been a lot of impact evaluation on the communities, and all of that needs to be archived. So that's what we are working on presently. And we are bringing GIS to power this, so that for every information that has been captured, you're able to know exactly where it's been done. But if it stops at that, it's just a knowledge pool that has no value. So part of my mandate is to create an academic exchange where we're reaching out to institutions in the States, particularly in the States, to begin to engage with this knowledge pool and to begin to do research. So we are getting the academia to begin to tease out of this project. And because of, as I said, our own vision is guided by the SDGs, we go through the sustainability test. We are looking at how we can put this knowledge in the hands of even students. So part of what we are moving is to get the academia involved for research, and also the communities and young people. So that's one of the ways in which we have been working on it. So for us, it's a different approach. The usual approach is just put up a website and that's it. But we have to do a lot of research to be able to understand the knowledge that is available. We have to do a lot of networking to bring in experts to be able to tease out information in this pool. And then we have to create a connection, even with the next generation, young people, to be interested in this pool of information. And because this is what the space we have been in, we have engagements at the university, we have hackathons that are going on. So that pool, we are pushing it in the space for the students to get to know more about. And then through competitions and all of that, they begin to not just get to know the problems that are in there, but they're able to also begin to profile solutions, industry-grade solutions. And that's what we have been doing for the past almost 5 years in my state. So that's one of the ways
let me take a pause and see if I can get, let me if I can hear from Raina what is happening in the US context, because I know in between 2019 and 2021, or is it 2018, there have been so many devastating floods, forest fires, tornadoes, hurricanes across the US. When you listen to what David is trying to do with the real experiences and turn that into a learning opportunity, are you seeing the same things happening in the states that you are most familiar with? Or are the members of your network reporting that this is happening? What has been your experience in terms of using the real world now to begin to prepare the community to understand what's happening and to be able to use the knowledge that they're getting to make better decisions and choices?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. I think largely, our network, as David was sharing, the big piece has been, how do we connect those that have that information and can then share it with the communities? We have instituted at Black Sustainability, we've instituted learning journeys where we take members of our network around to different areas that already have these challenges, that have been impacted or that need support, whether it's sustainable agriculture or whether we're dealing with water, and they're able to go, excuse me, and provide support on the ground, technical support, technical expertise, as well as doubling as service learning for those that are interested in understanding that. And across the board, what we have seen and what members have reported, as well as what I've just seen, I've worked with the city of Atlanta. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, in the southeastern United States, and working with the city of Atlanta and their clean energy advisory board, as we are looking at making sure that decisions get made, right? And we're transitioning over to clean energy. We advocated to make sure that the residents that are in the most energy burdened neighborhoods actually serve on the advisory board, and not just serve there, but now they've developed plain language translation to continue to educate other members. And so developing a network where they can continue to exchange, here's how we've actually approached the challenge in our community. Now we're looking at doing some microgrids, or this is some of the solutions that we like to see and apply. We're actually able to exchange that with other communities across the board that are having the exact same problems. And that's the power of having a solid network, to David's point, is we're able to exchange that information. I think we're at like almost 2,200 members at this point around, the United States and outside of the United States as well, where people are saying, look, we know we're going to experience greater flooding. It's going to get hotter. We're losing part of our land to water erosion and all of these other natural disasters. How can we exchange information so we can quickly respond so that we have greater resiliency? And so that's one of the things that we're seeing. We're seeing a greater advocacy, not only in our communities, where those that already have green businesses or that have programming or nonprofits that center around it. But one of the things that we're also doing is educating the politicians that are making and writing this into policy, because a lot of people make assumptions that somebody that's in political office, I'm not going to bash anyone, but that people that are in political office have this higher knowledge or wisdom. They're in that position to serve, right? And so for us, the big piece is it's our job to educate you. So we've been bringing them together and having the community that they've been trained at, the community that educates the politicians. And the politicians are now starting to advocate, because they weren't going to admit that they had that gap, right? They're not going to admit that they didn't know. So we're just going to have a presentation. We're just going to teach you a few things. And here is your 82-page report that you all published that we've translated down to 6 pages. Why don't you take a look at this? And this is what we like to see. So those are some of the things that we're doing, as well as it's not just educating the youth. It's not just educating the elders. We're going to educate the politicians too. And we're going to break that superior inferior line that we have in the back of our minds, that somebody with a PhD or that's in a political office knows it all. They don't. So we have to make sure that our community, based metrics match up with what the politicians are saying, seeing, and advocating for, so that we can start to close that gap.
Well, I'm going to have to ask you to do some work in the Caribbean region, because I'm going to, I know this is not Ensemble's topic, but she really has a great handle, especially because of her work in the tourism sector. She's done some work around universities. She sits on several committees in different industry sectors. So, her and sustainability is a broad thing. It's not about you have to be a geographic GIS expert or you have to be an expert in water. It's about, as you say, a mindset to be able to look at the fact that we're a system of systems, and we humans are at the tipping point of self-destruction if we don't do something different. And so when I hear you talk about educating the politicians, and one of the reasons why I'm so happy that Andrew is here, because after this last round, I'm going to have the audience begin to ask questions and just jump in what's happening in their countries. My concern for the Caribbean region, why I really want to see the nonprofit that I work on, and I founded that focus on Caribbean issues, continue to focus on the ocean as an entry point, and as well as begin work in space, because we do have the Caribbean Space Society, which I founded about 4 years ago. The whole idea is that the Caribbean Sea is what, first of all, unites us. Even changing that language, just begin to say, not the Caribbean Sea divides us, and we're divided by language, we're divided by sea, we're divided by, no. First of all, let's say we're united by the Caribbean Sea. And if it is that we have a problem with fishing and coral reef bleaching, etc., how are we going to change when most Caribbean people don't know nothing about the sea. We never learned anything about the sea. And I am thinking that will be up to the consultants that are part of CIMC. One of the reasons why I really said, okay, if I can't get Dr. Rattray, who also has influence, how can I get CIMC to take up this issue of sustainability literacy so that they're educating their clients? And I know that they themselves may not know. So how do we find new partnerships with a group like Reiner's group and CIMC and what David's group is doing in Nigeria? Because the whole point of us is that we have to become a planetary consciousness movement, have to begin to take shape. That is what my Smart Futures framework is about. And Dr. Nsamba, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's interesting as I was listening to to David and to Rainer, that the new competency framework for consultants that was developed by CMC Global in order to get consultants certified, because one of the goals of CMC Global and CIMC is to certify management consultants. And there is an assumption when you become a consultant that you provide technical services. And CMC Global wants our consultants to be rounded. They must understand the business environment that their clients are operating in. They must understand the wider environment. And so the new version of the competency framework has included the SDGs. So it is important that consultants who are candidates for certification demonstrate how they are integrating the SDGs into their projects. And it's interesting, Claire, that you mentioned the blue economy, because the competency framework is also requiring of consultants that they have a good understanding of the blue economy, the orange economy, because, a lot of times as consultants, we can be stuck in the past, and only see the economy from what we have traditionally known it to be. And with the emergence, and it's not even emerging anymore, the blue economy has been around. Barbados is the only country in the Caribbean that has a ministry of the blue economy. And so these are the new thoughts, these are the new competencies and skills that are being brought into the competency framework that any one of our candidates that's going to be certified as a certified management consultant must demonstrate, not know, but demonstrate in the projects that they are working on, that they have integrated this. So, the partnership with Rainer and David, just like how we invited you last year, Claire, to be a speaker on our ICD Day conference, I would love so that more of us can hear what it is that you are doing in the sustainability space so that they understand. And what's interesting? We have our strategic planning session starting on Thursday. We have to do it over a period of time because of the availability. And the strategic pillars on which we are building our strategy are one, sustainability. However, we were not seeing sustainability from this perspective. So thank you, Claire, for inviting me, because it means that my perspective of sustainability has broadened beyond what it is that we were considering. So one pillar is sustainability, one pillar is growth, one pillar is collaboration and teamwork, and the other pillar is partnerships. So this is perfect, Claire, as you raise the issue. How can a CIMC partner with David's company and Arena based on the work that they are doing in their space? This is really wonderful and fortuitous. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The last question from me before I open it up to the larger group. So we're talking about sustainability, literacy across the board for the workforce, especially the people in decision making. We know there's issues around ESG. A lot of US companies and global companies are very much plugged in. But for David and Dr. Nsamba, you know that in the Caribbean and Africa, companies don't necessarily do what's on the books. The whole the ecosystem in the US and Canada and the global north, if you will, is much stronger in terms of the law being able to stop companies from polluting or whatever. So in terms of really trying to educate, right, decision makers to see that it's in their own interest, not because the law is going to come in with a heavy stick, because the law doesn't work the same way in our smaller islands. But what might we do differently then? Thinking ahead, think about the fact that we're 7 years away from 2030. In the US, let's begin with you, Raina. You said educate politicians. We have a very, I wonder with the word, cantankerous relationship now in the US between the quote unquote, the greenies who want to take us forward and those who don't. So what are you seeing in terms of how consultants and NGOs can we work more, let's say, strategically to move faster, to get the SDGs to be seen more as a norm in America? Because it's not. SDGs are much more known in Nigeria and Jamaica and Barbados. You ask the average American what the SDGs are, and they don't have a clue. Because America has never been, even though America is a part of the UN system, America has never really been a part of the UN system. How do we have the NGOs in America, which are in a sense also global, because they're getting funding from the US government, USAID, even those in Canada, if anybody's here from Canada, in the UK, France, all of these global North countries are getting funding to go to Africa, the Caribbean, Pacific, Asia, and do all the sustainability work. And while I see a lot happening like in Wales and Scotland and Canada has a lot more robust like participatory system, I am not seeing that in the US space. So help me understand from your perspective, what might we do different? I say we because I live in the US, I'm in Jamaica, but I live in the US. What might we do differently to bring sustainability literacy to the decision-making elite in cities and small towns that have to govern water and waste management and those things?
Is there a presentation?
I'm not sure what's happening. Could somebody stop sharing, please? Whoever is sharing, could you stop sharing, please?
I think it's Dr. Sharp. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay. It's tough, right? One thing that I have seen, so I'll give some credit where credit is due. I'm in full agreement with you, Dr. Claire. Just the US is its own. We have to see ourselves as a part of the whole, right? And not separate from everything that is going to impact us, whether we're living in North America, South America, on the continent, it's going to affect us. So we have to make those changes and we have to make those shifts. One thing that I have seen though is been these regional centers, the RCEs, and the connection with the university systems. And they have been actually pushing and promoting the SDGs. And some companies and corporations put it up there as, having the SDG wheel, but I haven't seen as much substance behind actually supporting it outside of, we're dealing with 1, 2, 9, and 12, and that's what we see. There have not been, sadly enough, if we understand capitalism, there haven't been enough incentives for people to do the right thing. You would think, making sure that your children and your children's children have a place to live would be enough of an incentive, but sadly, it's tied to the dollar. And I guess we just believe we're just going to live here with acidic waters and not having to deal with any of those repercussions. I've seen a great opportunity for us to make sure that the SDGs are embedded in the curriculum, so that the children can help to impress upon some of the elders or the olders out here on adopting a lot of this. I have seen that become more and more present as children are coming home, or that they've been able to articulate a little bit more about the SDGs, but there has to be an onus on making sure that our educational system is tied into it, and that becomes another good push. The same way I talked about educating the politicians, there has to be a push as well on educating decision makers, not just those that are holding those office, but looking at those decision makers. So I'm with you there. I'm in full support, and I have been saddened to see the lack of wide adaptation. Like, I think in Japan, everybody wears the little pins with the SDGs, and people know which color is related to which number, and they're able to talk about it. And in board meetings, it's been incentivized. But here in the United States, in North America, sadly, unless you are within sustainability or within climate and resiliency or environmental justice, I have not seen as much of an adaptation or an interest in the SDGs, just because it hasn't been incentivized enough. But I see Charlotte and Andrew have their hands up. I don't know if
Yes,
that's
I'm going to give Charlotte the floor.
Okay.
She had some technical difficulties. She was unable to join us earlier. She was one of our scheduled speakers. So I'll give her the floor first. And then I have Andrew. And Sam McDonald has a question about certification fitting with DI. So let's take Charlotte first.
Good morning, everyone, and I apologize for my technical difficulties. And I'm probably getting ready to upset the apple cart because I'm addicted to the SDGs, and there are actually some other factors that you may not be familiar with. So I did create a few PowerPoint slides, and we can see them if you want, but essentially, there are a couple things that I want to share with you that you may not be familiar with. Number one, probably the most central thing, is that sustainability leaders that are Black, Brown, and Indigenous have been to a large degree disenfranchised from the policy process. So let me say that first. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that. So people like me that have master's degrees and PhDs, and we're peer reviewed, we are to a large degree, probably 90% disenfranchised from some of those more central roles. So that's first of all, and that includes the RCE. I do sit on the RCE at Georgia Tech. And so let me just say that, first of all, we do not have a single Black, Brown, or Indigenous professor or instructor in my program. So let me start there. The second thing that you need to understand before you give up on the SDGs, because they are my favorite thing, and if you give me an opportunity, I'll talk your face off. But the SDGs are important. The first reason that they're important is because they are vetted. They're vetted across the globe. And one of the things that I want to emphasize is that the SDGs originally, their original purpose was to aggregate data and outcomes for the poorest countries. However, and if I don't make you understand one thing today, this is it. That many of these impacts, much of the bottom line of the SDGs, although they were originally developed for what are called emerging economies, are also true for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in developed countries. Let me say that again. We are facing some of those exact same challenges. We're facing them in future work. We're facing them in agriculture. We're facing them in extreme heat. We're facing them in affordable housing. All of that is to say that the SDGs are a guideline, and the fact that we can look at them, they have vetted data, they are based on research, we can then use them as a shortcut to make an argument for people that are living around the globe who are Black, Brown, and Indigenous. So when you hear us talking about people in these emerging economies, so for instance, if you talk about funding for women and girls, typically in the SDGs, you are talking about poor economies. Think about women here in the US. They have gotten less than 1% of venture capital for their startups. So don't get me started on this is only happening in one part of the world. My role as a global sustainability person is to do the research on NA, EU, and China. So a lot of what I focus on is this type of research. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Andrew, I saw your hand up. Let's hear your comment or question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. Good evening, good morning, panelists and everyone who is watching. Very important discussion. After my return from Grenada, I've been traveling the region, looking at the school system, visiting the classrooms, and see how important it is for the people on the ground. And one of the things that we have to look at, and Dr. Nelson, you know, we spoke while I was there, the importance of the training both for the teachers and also educating from a primary school level those kids. From that level, we will get more information, more interest and awareness. What I picked up in the islands too is not a lot of persons in the community is aware of the Sustainable Development Goal and the input. So to be able to provide such kind of support from that level, even in agriculture and marine blue economy, much more is needed. But I think if we focus with the curriculum and provide that kind of support to the teachers too, those teachers really do need that kind of support, and implement programming and bridging the gap for coming out of the Summit of the Americas. The importance of civil society work is crucial in education.
Yes, I want to pause here, Andrew, because coming after this conversation, we'll be able to speak with Dr. Fred Mednick, who is actually the founder of Teachers Without Borders. I'm going to hold off on the teacher side of it till we have him on the station. But we have a comment from Sam McDonald, which I think refers to what Charlotte had asked about, and what Dr. Jaja had asked about, how certification fits in with DEI. And we also have a question from Basir, I think had a question. I think also Raina had her hand up back. So I'm not sure if Sam wants to unmute and ask her question, or she wants to just get a response. Sam McDonald wants to, so Sam McDonald I'm talking about, not Samuel Nixon. If Sam McDonald wants to ask her question, go ahead, Sam. Because I didn't understand the question. So maybe you have a preface before the question.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson, and hello, everybody. I think I'm going to make my question actually more generic to the conversation, if I may. I'm a great one on teaching systems thinking in education and futures thinking, so that we can get right to the root of what a lot of our global problems are. So I suppose my question is one of a challenging one to say, how does certification in any field actually fit into diversity, equality, and inclusivity? Because the minute you actually put it in, who doesn't get a chance to participate? So I think I'm going to leave it there.
Yes, before Dr. Bridger steps off, I know she has to go. The certification question, I think, was raised by you. So I'm not sure if you want to respond to that, because certification in CIMC for the Caribbean region is not the same as certification globally. In the Caribbean, we tend not to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. So, but I think certification around sustainability in terms of environmental sustainability, water and those things, how are you seeing the certification process happening around consulting globally?
The certification is a global credential, just like project management is global and change management credential certification. Those are global. Similarly, so the CMC, which is Certified Management Consultants. So what the international organization is saying is that all of our consultants have to be integrating their projects or integrating the SDGs into their project. Raina talked about educating the clients. Yeah, we have a responsibility to educate the clients on the whole issue of sustainability. And thank you, David, for introducing me to geoliteracy, because it's a first. I was hearing about it, and I'm not embarrassed to say so, folks, but as he mentioned it, I jumped on and I started researching, and it's something that I should have known about long before. And this is why this kind of discussion is so important, because we raise issues that many of us are not aware of, and then we go and we do our research, and that is part of our learning, that's part of our literacy, and that is what is part of the whole sustainability. So Claire, just to say that the credentials of CMC, there are certain criteria and there's certain knowledge and information that as consultants, management consultants, we must demonstrate before we can earn the credentials CMC. And that's how the SDGs come in, because CMC Global has now introduced them, and it now becomes a requirement for us to become certified. So I think that's where it's going to help. And so it will force, it's not just about knowledge, it's about application. So it's going to force us as consultants, not only to become more knowledgeable and to apply that knowledge, but to bring our clients into that space as well.
Well, thank you so much. I know you have to run. We have 10 minutes or so before we wrap up. Raina, back to you. We're having a conversation. This format doesn't really call for slides, so we don't really need to have a show where we want to talk and hear each other. So Raina, back to you. I've seen you wanted to say something. I think Basir has a question, but until he comes back up, if you could respond to what you heard, and so you kind of got excited for a minute there.
Yeah, well, it was just for a point of clarity. I think Charlotte and I are definitely in full alignment of the impacts in our communities that are, we see, you know, the Black community gets the short end of the stick. You talk about SDGs and these pieces and then environmental justice. And we're like, we've been living this, whatever you want to call it. We've been dealing with it. And we always get the short end of the stick. I just wanted to make sure to provide some clarity. I think she said she had technical difficulties that we were really impressing upon why the US hadn't adopted it and seen more adoption across corporate spaces and in government. And so I was just trying to add a point of clarity, but she and I have already chatted. So I want to leave space for anybody that has questions.
Well, I think Basir is saying something about he wants to comment on the issue of crisis management, which I think is his area of expertise, and sustainability issues. Now, obviously, every time you have a hurricane, every time you have another bomb going off somewhere, I mean, there's so many things that cause crisis in the world, right? So if it's hurricane, it's flood, it's refugees on the move, it's bombing in some place of the world or another, there's a crisis that has to be managed. So I'd love to hear what he has to say on the relationship between a crisis manager having to understand also sustainability management and having literacy for people who are in that space, so people who are involved in cleanup and managing of response and refugee response, etc., disaster management. The floor is yours.
It's wonderful to be amongst wonderful mind readers, because you have read my mind, Dr. Nelson, so did Raina. As far as crisis management goes, you have to start with integrity and obviously ability to sense what is going on. 6 years ago, I wanted to take part in a global warming conference, and I was politely refused as I was not a scientist. But it is a crisis, and only crisis management model will give you sustainability. So everything was looked at 6 years
Wait,
ago.
wait, wait, wait. Before you go on, Bessie, where are you based? Let everyone
I'm
know
sorry,
where
I'm
you're
terribly
based.
sorry. I'm based in Istanbul, Turkey. My LinkedIn profile is out of Belgium because I do a lot of contract out of Europe. And I'm an independent consultant, so that's why I am more of a free spirit.
Yes, but I want to let them know before you continue.
I apologize because for time's sake, I thought I would just directly delve into the.
But I'm glad you raised that. I'm glad you're speaking as somebody who is working in a totally different environment. I mean, you're based in Turkey, which has its share of disasters. Europe has its share of disasters. And again, if we're talking about getting to the stage where enough people understand the whole geology system is a system of systems. My concern, to be quite frank, why I want this to be so much on top of mind, there's a lot of what I call fantasy technical responses to the climate change. We have like all these climate engineering, dramatic responses, when sometimes a very small, simple hack would do a better job. And the billions of dollars are being thrown at these big responses, whether it's putting green sand on the beach somewhere on a white sand beach. These ideas are terrifying to me. So Charlotte, I see your hand. How can we then as a collective, everybody's on this call is here because you already believe in it. I don't think anybody in here is acting to be convinced, right? So we're here more because we have to find each other to figure out how we're going to move this thing forward. How are we going to begin to have enough of us working across the boundaries of country and race and gender and culture differences and sector differences? I'm an engineer, you're an educator, whatever, to begin to educate enough leaders, whether they're political leaders, they are the people who are the CEOs that have an ESG office, but the ESG person doesn't want to get the time of day or the budget to do the work. We're talking about the people in finance at the the big companies in Wall Street that are funding these things, such as these geological engineering marvels, which I think don't have any proof of concept to demonstrate they won't do more harm than good. So I'd love to hear from Charlotte, I'd love to hear from David and Raina. What can we do really to begin to talk about this and have more people understand what's at stake among the voters, the citizens, the civic engagement, so that they ask questions when these crazy ideas are being put out there, for us to not wait until something as worse happened because somebody had a grand idea. And my pet peeve is the one on green sand on the beach. So put a green sand on a beach to mop up carbon in Caribbean Sea is a good idea. That's my pet peeve right now. So
okay,
Charlotte,
Claire, so I'm gonna try and calm you down a little bit. And to Basir's part, I am also in your lane. I spent probably my first 20 years in the forestry industry. So I have that background in emergency preparedness. And what I can tell you is that a lot of it is that we really need to also understand specific environmental challenges around topography. And so a lot of it is we do have cohorts throughout land management, forestry, many of these natural resources areas, but hang on to this, that we are just not connecting the dots. The planet really doesn't care what our specialty area is because the urgency has reached a tipping point where all of these issues now intersect in ways that are going to be felt sooner than later. So a lot of the work that I do as a consultant and a research scholar is to look at how these tipping points are overlapping and what kinds of strategies do we need. To Claire's point and to Raina's point, try not to be too frustrated, but because we do need to get more people to the table, but some of it is that we don't know each other. So I'm so appreciative to Claire for hunting us all down. But moving forward, we really do need to know each other. We need to band together in numbers. with people like Basir across the world, because our voices are important. So my last data point that I want all of you to write down, 80% of protected land, 80% across the globe, not just in developed countries, but across the globe, are held and protected by Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And yet we represent less than 10% of leadership and voices in this space.
Thank you so much for that information. David, I want to turn the floor to you. We have to wrap up. We're 3 minutes away. Give us your take on the one thing that we might think about doing to begin to really push sustainability literacy for the leadership elite across the Nigeria and certainly the West African region that you might have more sway over.
Thank you very much. The question is, what can we do?
Yes.
Sometimes it can be overwhelming because when we begin to talk about sustainability and the need for this literacy, it seems like we're speaking another language to the politicians. And that's why I really appreciate what Raina said. We need to educate the politicians. And the best way to go about it is to get their information, the data they have, and interpret it and put it before them in black and white for them to see the reality of what is really going on. It's really key to what we are doing. There's a need.
I'm going to jump in here. I just saw a post that Sam Nixon made about working with the faith community to do training. And I'm wondering if that's another entry point instead of the politicians, because maybe the faith community can get to the people fast enough for them to put the pressure on politicians. Because if you and I say it won't be the same as if a whole bunch of voters are saying the same thing. So maybe we should put that in our calculation then of our strategy as to how are we going to get the politicians and decision makers.
Yes, it's as if you read my mind. I wanted to say there's a need to engage communities of like minds to band together. In the numbers, I think we are going to get that impact. And we all have clusters where we have in our industry associations and all of that. As we bring this out at a strong voice and push it through communities or clusters we have, faith-based, community-based, all of those clusters, we are going to get the results we want. And someone also put up in the text that the language of politicians are dollars. I think there's also that need for us in our communication to talk in that language they understand, for them to better understand the cost of their bad decisions, to be able to see the impact that it's going to have now and in the future. So there's a need for us to be able to communicate in that specific space, being able to put a cost to the steps they need to take now, and if they don't take it, the implication. So I believe when that cost comes up to, it's going to get results, because with that, we're able to communicate with them the urgency of what needs to be done. And for everyone, particularly consultants that have opportunity of handling projects, whether you are certified by CMC or not, I think SDGs should be the framework in which we implement our projects. And at the end of each project, we should look at how we can bring about a transfer of the knowledge to the community, to the young people coming. There should be that's in our planning for projects that we have. As I said, for every project that we bring in, we always look at it. Okay, how can we bring this knowledge to the community? How can we get young people to begin to understand their world better? And how can they be engaged in everything that is going on? And I believe that's just the way to go to get the results that we desire.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'm going to give Rainer the last word because Dr. Mednick is waiting. We have a last half an hour with him. So Rainer, the last word is yours to close off on this round, and then we will ask Dr. Fred to unmute, unmark, and let's hear from the founder of Teachers Without Borders.
Okay, gratitude. Thank you. to echo the point, I think one of the things that we made sure to do as well with those politicians, and I'm going to seal up here, was that we went to their office. We went down to City Hall. We paid for food and we were there during their lunch hour. So we've got all the incentives here to come sit, hear your constituents. We've got a certain number that are actually here and they're going to present it to you to help incentivize and to make it almost a no-brainer. So when they don't show up, then we can publish and share, we came down, we were there with you, we fed you, and we educated you, and it came from people that live in your district around time where it's getting ready time for re-election, right? Because that's also key. So making it, putting the pressure on in a healthy way. And now there's demand for an encore for those that weren't able to make it because now they're talking about it. So I agree with you all that you do have to speak in dollars. We're also able to give them out a budget of what we would like to see and how much it would cost in our communities if they're serious, and then tying it into policy that they signed in. But I think all in all, around the board, I'm grateful for this opportunity and grateful that you pulled everyone together, Dr. Claire, because with the Black Sustainability Network, we've been pulling together people across all disciplines. That's been the big piece where we saw the gap. People in water aren't talking to people in waste, aren't talking to people in ag, aren't talking to people in eco-housing. And we know that it's a holistic approach that we have to take. And so now by bringing them together, experts, enthusiasts, people that have their own business entities, bringing them together into one place and space on this platform to not only exchange information, but to promote their events and to have them host their own educational series called Each One Teach Ones. What have you learned, David? What have you learned, Charlotte? What have you learned, Dr. Claire, that has been important to you within your field? And have people tune in and listen, because then they're able to say, well, you know what we're doing over here, we found funding that would be complementary. Let's work together. Oh, well, we're working with the youth. We'd love to have them come talk to those that can now serve as JEGNAs or mentors that can start an apprenticeship program and start to facilitate those types of conversations. So it's a holistic approach. We all live here on this planet. Everything is integrated, and let them tell us that it's all separate. And I think that the SDGs are a really great way for us to have a shared framework and shared language that we can use. So I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for all of the fellow presenters. Thank you so much for considering me, and I'm looking forward to hearing what's coming next.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So we have wrapped up our first half an hour with Liana. We then move to the second hour with a panel of people who are working in the ground. We don't consider educators, but no one is international depth education. We're now going to hear from an educator, Dr. Fred Mednick, who is the founder of Teachers Without Borders. I'm still hoping that Keisha Thorpe joined us. She had said she'd be able to, so hopefully nothing has made her unable to join us. But we have half an hour or so to spend with Dr. Mednick to talk about, what can teachers do? It is a day of education. And I was just so excited because we just met, literally just met. And he said, I'm happy to come and share my 2 cents. So I'm very, really happy because, again, an organization like that, which is global, certainly can support some of the things that Andrew talked about in terms of teachers in the Caribbean, teachers in Africa, teachers in developing countries who are really strapped. And so, Dr. Mednick, thank you for joining us. So we've been talking about, you've been here, so you hear what we've been talking about. So you can jump right in, you've been here all morning. What are your thoughts as the founder of Teachers Without Borders? What are you seeing in terms of sustainability education that you think is working, not working, the things that you think you yourself would want help with from some of these very people here who are practitioners?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Claire, and everybody. My heart is beating a lot. Usually these kinds of things, you wait your turn, lots of talking heads, and then, you make your point. But this one is sort of, I've got notes all over the place here from the things that everybody has been saying. To address the issue of sustainability that I am seeing is to reimagine a teacher not as the way in which a UN staffer once told me was anyone with information, valuable information to share. So it would transcend the boundaries of the professionally trained teacher to include indigenous groups. I guess I'll call myself part of the elderly. and the kind of collective wisdom. And so I heard that the very first day I started the organization 22 years ago. So the mission of the organization is to look, teachers are the largest professionally trained group in the world, right? They know who's sick and missing, orphaned by AIDS and COVID. They know who's subject for human trafficking networks. Their ears to the ground. They're the glue that holds society together. They're a development army. So the idea would be to connect teachers to information and each other in order to close the education divide, but to have teachers as development agents and agents of change. And so when you've touched on elements of sustainable development goals, I have stories from all over the world. And since you raised Nigeria has come up, I'll tell one of those. And then you've also talked about education in emergencies. All of these things, kind of dealing with the issue of the role of the teacher as a sustainable agent in these communities. And so we've worked a lot in education in emergencies. We do not necessarily make a distinction between national and natural disasters, which we used to do, because I think these natural disasters are national. The building that's unreinforced that falls in the earthquake is because of neglect, and that's a national, disaster. So the mobilization of teachers as agents of change. The quick story about Nigeria, which I loved, is that when the Millennium Development Goals began, the Nigerian Teachers Without Borders group says, well, we ain't waiting for anybody to bless us with, money or resources. They don't care. So it has to be, as Raina said, and others, a personal enterprise. So are the girls equal in my family? Is the water clean in my community? And so unless the SDGs were personalized, they couldn't make a political impact. And I think this connection between the personal and the political is extraordinary, because I don't think leaders are born or made. I think they just show up. And so our teachers have just shown up. It's and the work is done entirely voluntary. There's no, big money-making machine here. So really quick story. Unfortunately, there's no money-making machine. So in Nigeria, the Teachers Without Borders created an ambassador program, a Sustainable Development or Millennium Development Ambassador program. And so every month they would go to this hotel and learn about another sustainable development goal, and they had to, demonstrate it in their family and their community. Okay. The issue of incentives came up earlier. The incentives for them, which is so clever, and only because brains are evenly distributed around the world, right? So the local brains thought of this. When you go from one Nigerian state to another, often, you have to go through these checkpoints, and sometimes these checkpoints are legitimate and sometimes they're not, and you're pressing some money in somebody's hands. And so the ambassador program said, okay, we made a deal with the driver's license bureau. And this is, I know, bizarre story, but a driver's license bureau, so that so that you get this cheaper insurance, you get a personalized license plate that says MDG or SDG Ambassador 1, 2, 3. And when you cross the border from one, state to another, woo, an ambassador's coming through, boom, boom, no fee. And I think this nature of clever, local, brilliant brains evenly distributed is the key. So connecting teachers to information and each other mobilizes teachers. Now we always say, oh, there's so much on their plates, and I say that teachers really are in the profession for the nature of service. And so just giving you one quick example, and I don't, need to go on, has to do with sustainability and education in emergencies. So in Tajikistan, many people believe there's a bowl underneath the earth that when it's bothered by mosquitoes, it shakes and the earth shakes. And that's what, how, earthquakes happen. But our local person, Solmaz, Mohajer, a geologist and teacher, did not demean this community and say, no, that's not how it works. But she worked with it, spoke the local language, and connected science with safety. So when that happens, what happens to the earth and what goes on there. And so that led to a, earthquake science and safety program that spread to many countries, started, went to China, went to the Haitian earthquake, where teachers as development agents were making change in their communities by teaching science and safety, where people would run indoors at the sign of a disaster and the buildings kill the kids. So 50% of all kids who die in earthquakes die in their schools. And so the connection between earthquake science and safety is a development and sustainability issue. And unfortunately, we talked about money, about 2.5% of all money spent in an emergency is spent on education. So the focus of our work in disaster risk reduction is to look at the 3 stages of education emergencies: preparation and planning, right? The intervention when a crisis happens, and reconstruction afterwards. And the whole emphasis has been on, the intervention. And it's only in the past 15 years where teachers are part of first responder teams. They count the kids, they reunite the families, they create child-friendly spaces, they create a normal environment, normalcy. So the role of teachers and their voice is essential in this. And finally, at the university in Brussels that I teach, even though I live in Seattle, Washington, it's an international program. I teach education and global development, and everybody focuses on SDGs, and they all have a project they call their Declaration of Interest, and they come from about 30 different countries, and they all go back to their countries as educators to find ways and their own abilities and their own voices to connect the SDGs with sustainable change. I know I just blabbed on.
I am very excited about your stories, because to me, and I'm glad Andrew is still on, because they've just started a new NGO in Grenada. It's a new government, and I think they're very educatable, this government. And so I do think the stories that you have shared could become very interesting for this NGO, because we've been talking about what can we do as a major launch project. And this idea about SDG ambassadors might be something that we can test through ICS, which is the Institute of Caribbean Studies, Caribbean organization, working with the people we know in Grenada, Anguilla, the smaller countries that might be easier to tease out and eventually get it to the JTA, big country like Jamaica or Trinidad, we have many more teachers. Because this is so important what you're saying. We have a situation coming into the conference on Saturday where we heard a lot about the under-resourced nature of our schools. I was at Marcus Garvey School in Jamaica yesterday, and Marcus Garvey is a national hero, but the school is one of the poor performing, underserved, working with kids who are very marginalized. And so it really, for me, who recognizes Marcus Garvey as our first and one of our most important national heroes, it's heartbreaking to see a school in his name is not operating at the level of excellence that the person himself tried to put off. And I'm saying, well, at least they invited me, and at least they now have a leadership team that really is looking for partnerships. And as I'm hearing this, and I'm hearing what Raina is saying, what Sam is saying, what Charlotte is saying, I'm thinking out of this conversation can really come good, but I say pilot practice projects, such as, I don't even know if we have a Teachers Without Borders chapter in the Caribbean, and Fred, perhaps you can tell me if there's one, But if there's one, we need to have a conversation with them when this is over and say, hey, how can Teachers Without Borders Caribbean get engaged with the climate change CC5Cs movement and the ocean and blue economy movement, so that they can have information, relevant little modules to put into the school system rather than waiting for the policy document, to come forward. Because within the ministry, it's just not going to happen at the pace we need. And what I learned from the principles that were on my session on Saturday was that those transformational principles have been, what can we say, those who act first and ask questions later, right? Because if they ask the question before, they might be told, no, you can't do it, it's not going to work, we have no funding. So they do it and then they ask for permission after. And so that's how they've been able to move their schools from, many of them from failing schools to now schools that are performing. As you're hearing this, Andrew, what comes up for you? Gwen, I know you have teachers in your group. What is coming up for you as something concrete that we can take away? So long after this call is over, I can be in touch and say, hey, let's try pilot in the Caribbean somewhere, which is small region. We have susceptible to floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, something really concrete that we can say, next year this time, we can say, as a result of this conversation, we did this one thing, no matter how small. What are you thinking? What comes up for you? Andrew?
Well, Dr. Nelson, one of the things that we realized, and when we launched the Generation Grenada Foundation, the focus is on training, right across the board in various sectors, aspect, but also specifically for the teachers. And I think one of the things too the region has really lacked is the implementation that is really needed. So I'm impressed with Mr. Fred Mednick, information and also a collaboration of resources that is needed in the region to propel us to the next level. And I think by working with smaller islands like Grenada and the OECS island, you'll be able to really give an impact and also to be able to roll out implementation, because there's been a lot of studies, but we have failed on the implementation. So providing that kind of training specifically for those teachers, because in 2021, when we did the neurodivergent training, we realized teachers needed more train the trainer to really propel them, and that training was a glass of tall water for them, where they observed so much information that was new to them. So to be able to bring about that training at that level, where the internationally, being able to be at that level internationally, than being left behind and trying to catch up with those training was crucial. So our focus really has to look at those areas, especially in areas like, as I know your pet piece is the blue economy. Much more needs to be done in those specific areas that are lacking.
Yes, Charlotte King. I know you're plugged into a lot of different people and places. Where do you see, if we said, okay, let's make sure that this conversation counts for something? I'm very action oriented at this point, right? So I like to talk, but I don't hold these talks for the sake of just talking. I'm trying to get something to move, right? Where do you see your network playing in here? Because between Atlanta, for example, has a lot of Caribbean people. We now have Caribbean people in elective office in the State House. So there are things we could actually get working with official partnerships with the school systems, perhaps? Where are you seeing in your mind? I know it won't be totally fleshed out, but what comes up for you as you're hearing this come as a potential entry point for maybe working with the school systems in Georgia, and as some teachers and the Teachers Without Borders chapters in Caribbean region, since we have Dr. Fred here and he can help us reach those people, as opposed to starting with people who are not already thinking, in a global sense.
Well, I hear both your frustration and your focus on getting something done as quickly as possible. But also, as someone who has been in this space for a long time, what I've also been aware of is that in the academic space, there has been reluctance to partner with many of these organizations. For example, I was responsible for the legislative forum after Katrina. So as you can imagine, that was a huge learning curve. We learned so much about what worked and what didn't work. However, now that I am an academic scholar, I can tell you that there is huge reluctance in the academic community to partner with a lot of these agencies. I'm not sure the cause of that, but what I can tell you, for example, to Fred's point, I actually was in Puerto Rico to talk to many of these small nation states, and what they told us about the challenges that they face, we listened, we made sure that that information went to the Secretary of Agriculture, to begin to look at both causation as well as other resources. So a lot of this is because you don't know that we're doing these things behind the scenes. I really do see that a lot of this is connectivity, that we're all still in too many silos. Because if you were more willing or open, I guess, to partnering across the board, then some of this would be a little bit easier. So a quick example is that we found out that one of the things that was a significant danger is a lot of communities, including teachers, want to move very quickly after a catastrophic event. So there are two dangers that come from that. One is contamination of food and water. And there are some interventions to try and address that. But crossing that line in the academic community, you would think that we're out here kidnapping children. I mean, it's that difficult. And then the second thing from working on the project after Katrina that I saw for myself is that there is also some issues around the economic development. So you have developers who will argue that they're bringing jobs to a community, for example, and they take measures that will then result in significant acceleration of damage. So the hotels on the coast of Mississippi moved the berms. Now imagine this, they took the natural topography that would have mitigated the harsh catastrophe that happened there, and they moved the berms. I don't know how much more I can say about that. But in addition, we could have told them that there's a plant, and everywhere we saw, they're called live oaks. And so a lot of this is stubbornness on both sides to look at what those natural resources are. But we saw for ourselves that for every community that had a live oak, that residence or that building was still standing and had the least amount of damage. But again, there were people in that community that made a decision that they were either not going to plant live oaks or they were expendable. So part of it is this whole issue, and I realize I sound like a broken record, but a lot of it is we really do need to increase be more collaborative. And if you even look at the SDGs, number 17 has to do with collaboration and partnerships. So I'm begging the academic community, y'all do all this research, but we're the ones actually out here doing this work and seeing it. And that has been the basis of a lot of the research that I do.
Thank you. Sir McDonald, I see your hand up.
Oh, thank you for that, Charlotte. That was really interesting. I want to just bring a little bit of a disruption to the conversation. So part of my training actually works with people's intrinsic nature, and we're all wired differently towards different things. And I think that if we want the world to be different in the future, we have to start recognizing this, obviously with children at school level, so that we can actually build them from how they're intrinsically wired. But the reason I felt I had to say something is there are people in the world who want to hurry things up. I'm one of them. It's literally wired into me. There are other people who have been put on this world to do policies, rules, regulations, and without them, the world would be an absolute disaster, and so on and so forth. And I feel very strongly about it that, we often talk about equality for children, for human beings, until we actually change the value metric from IQ and recognize that the one universal value metric is actually how each person has been endowed with natural talents. It's universal, every single human being, and we are human first. It changes how we actually enter into situations. So when I'm in an organization or a group or a meeting, my mind immediately goes to who is the person that I'm actually talking to. What is their filter? And your filter actually comes from how you're intrinsically wired. But I've just really, you can hear my passion. I just felt so strongly to put that on the table. And I totally see that as the future.
Well, I do think that what you're saying, Sam McDonald, and what we are saying here is that at the end of the day, our goal in conversations from Futuresense now is to make sense of the future, moving people from future shock to Futuresense. It's the primary goal of this conversation series. I started this back maybe like in 2017, so I've been doing this for some time. And I also, like Charlotte King, I am a passionate SDG evangelist. I actually, and I'm going to make a shameless plug here, I actually tried to convince the Caribbean governments to get the UN to appoint me as special envoy for the SDGs. It didn't work. They didn't get the idea. So I'm doing it anyway, even without the title, because I really feel like there has to be someone that's not a silo person to see the connections across the different sectors and subsectors and communities and countries, etc. There are 15 countries in the CARICOM, but in the Caribbean region, in terms of the sea, we're talking about 36 territories controlled by different countries. So from France to Colombia to Jamaica to Nicaragua, Mexico, all of these countries own, quote unquote, a piece of the Caribbean Sea, and they do not, as a general rule, speak to each other. So when we're talking about sustainability literacy, I am figuring all sorts of, nefarious ways to still become the official evangelist for the SDGs. And I think maybe teachers may be my approach. So I'm very excited to hear that Fred Mednick had this experience. So we'll give him the closing words because he's our special guest. If you could close us out, Fred, thank you.
Sure. I did want to acknowledge something that Trish McOrmond wrote in the chat, where she says, I think one of the critical issues is the cult of individualism, capitalism, colonialism breeds, where emergency management, prep, and prevention is all about what the individual needs to do, et cetera. The emphasis on the individual at the expense of the collective. And so to close out, this is absolutely to agree with this, that it's not how you protect yourself as a victim each time, but the role of teachers as proactive agents. And, when you rile up, when you teach kids, let's put it this way, about safety and science. And if you were to do a pilot, my feeling is to connect science with safety. It's palatable for lots of different people, but parents want to send their kids to school that are safe. And if kids are learning about this and it's not safe, as a former principal, there's nothing more terrifying than an angry parent. That there is this connection not only to the collective effort that emerges from this, but it's connected to academic achievement. And so on the one hand, you say, oh, we've got to do this, and more. If science and safety is connected, academic achievement for these communities grows because they're engaged and they see the connection. And when that happens, the parents are seeing their kids grow, the school is unsafe, or the community is unsafe, you've got this recipe for a collective social action that, I believe is unstoppable. We've seen this in a lot of different places. So I wanted to acknowledge what, Trish was saying, and certainly what, Dr. King was saying, because I think that there is this nature of, the teacher and the silo of the classroom. And it's really a teacher as a very important acupuncture point in the larger social contract of social justice.
Wow, thank you so much. And we leave it at that. And I love that phrase, an acupuncture point in the system of social justice. So folks, I want to thank you for joining us on Futuresense Now, where we have conversations that elaborate our vision for a preferred future, conversations that allow us to exhume, if you will, our fears of the futures we fear, and conversations that allow us to begin to explore how we might begin to collaborate in new ways to co-create the future we want. This is what I think is the heart of the Smart Futures philosophy, so enshrined in my book, Smart Futures for a Flourishing World. I'm grateful for your presence here, Dr. Fred Mednick. I'm thankful that Raina, Dr. Jaja, David Afalayan, and Charlotte King are with us, and I want to thank all of you all for listening. Our next event will be on February the 4th. It's Human Fraternity Day, and I'm going to continue in my 3-year, or it's my 4th year, doing a conversation. It's my 4th year, actually. On my 4th year of doing a conversation on the role of the interfaith community in environmental stewardship. And this year, we're including cosmic stewardship, because we're moving so fast in space. I got to add that into my thing. So thank you all for listening. Be blessed.
Thank you.
Good job, Dr. Nelson, the ideation person. God has placed you on this earth for such a time as this. You are amazing. You are a visionary, and we are so glad to be in your network.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Miss Jaja, Dr. Nelson.